So I think Apple Computers is getting way too much credit for pulling out of the Republican convention. I'm sure they will do the same with the Democratic convention. They won't be giving free equipment. They actually didn't do this in 2012 either because the Democratic 2012 convention decided that as a sort of a symbolic contrast with Mitt Romney, they wouldn't be taking gifts like that for that convention. So Apple products were not freely given away in 2012 either, but they're not going to be this year, and that's explicitly because of Donald Trump being who he is, and so that is a decision as Apple has made. I think, fair enough. It's a good decision. Let's not sort of get overly praise here, but fine. Someone who is freaked out about this decision and quite upset is a man that we have not heard from in a long time. He's usually doing segments built around either his commitment to juicing, I've heard him talk about. I've heard him say a lot of interesting things about race, and he appears to live his life inside his limo, sort of constantly on the lookout for a homeless person that he can choose to not give money to. That's right. That's Stuart Varney on Fox and Friends, throwing a fit because Apple is not going to be giving computers to the Republican National Committee for their convention.
Tech giant Apple dropping all support from the upcoming RNC, vowing not to provide technology or funding in protest of Donald Trump. Here to react is host of Varney and Company on the Fox Business Network, Stu Varney. Good morning.
Good morning.
So Tim Cook's becoming very political.
Oh, I think Apple has become the most political and politicized company in America. They've just withdrawn support of any kind from the GOP convention. Before that, they were very much in favor of gay marriage, very public on that. Tim Cook had told people who may be climate change skeptics, we don't want your business. He took a very political position on that. They would not open the iPhone of the San Bernardino terrorists. That was also taking a political position. And now the GOP convention, they're not going to help.
Well, that is according to a report in Politico that came out over the weekend. But if you're in the business of selling something, it would seem that if you want as many people to buy a product, you don't alienate half the customers.
Yes, and actually Apple also has trouble in China, where it really wants to sell a lot of iPhones. They've got a trumped-up charge, forgive the expression, of some kind of patent infringement about the design of the Apple iPhone, and a minor leagues court in China has said you can't sell the 6 and the 6 Plus in Beijing. That's simply... But look, the point is China is tweaking Apple, and by doing so, tweaking American politics. That's what they're doing. So and it's not working. Apple stock has gone from 130 down to 97. It was once the darling of investors, and now it's not.
Yeah, we're waiting for the next move, but now the only next move we're getting is the political move. But do they have problems selling in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, or any of these nations that have no tolerance for gays, no tolerance for women?
Now, Tim Cook comes out against Trump and comes out against Republicans that they are bigoted in some way over immigration and Muslims. But Tim Cook, who leads Apple, has no problem doing business in the Gulf where they execute gays. He has no problem doing that. And yet he has this response to Trump and the GOP.
Sure. The irony is the fact that we love Apple because, it's designed in Cupertino, California. But this is what Donald Trump's talking about. They ship off all the manufacturing to China, where wages are much, much lower than the United States. And that's the kind of, story that Donald Trump says if he's president of the United States, he would like to turn that wheel around.
He has actually called for a boycott of Apple products. That's what he called for recently.
First of all, why does Stuart Varney and all of the other Fox and Friends, when did they become communists? Apple should be able to do whatever it wants to whomever it wants, whenever it wants, because it's a private company. So it's really actually disgusting and disturbing that they would criticize Apple for anything, let alone shipping production to China. What are we in, a communist world now? What happens to Stuart Varney?
It's funny because they're realizing that I remember listening to Sonic Youth, the cool thing, talking about corporate America. Back when corporate America was very conservative, and that they're moving on issues like this, the conservatives are realizing, hey, actually, we can't depend on these companies.
Well, and by the way, you can depend on Apple being committed to not paying its tax bill. You can depend on Apple and trying to hide a massive amount of money overseas that it won't repatriate. You can Apple will certainly happily exploit foreign labor, and Apple complains about the tax code. And all they've said is that essentially, yes, for branding purposes, they're not comfortable with overt bigotry, which in a global marketplace and with an increasingly educated consumer group is actually just untenable as a
Yeah.
brand.
That's what's so funny about
Which is the great irony of this freakout. This is a business decision. I'm sure Tim Cook, I think it's established he's a gay man. He doesn't appreciate all of the homophobia. I'm sure many people who work at Apple are quite cosmopolitan and quite tolerant and quite intellectual in some ways. I'm sure they don't like this stuff personally. But ultimately, this is a brand decision. Donald Trump and what they represent, what he represents in the Republican Party is so toxic to, again, as Sam would say, normal people, that it's a brand destroyer. And that's what Stuart Varney can't get his bloated head around.
Well, that was funny when Ducey said, aren't they going to hurt themselves business-wise if they turn off half the country? It ain't half the country, buddy. That
It ain't
thinks,
half the country.
That climate change isn't real
Nope.
and that gay people shouldn't be allowed to get married. That's just a small sect of you crazy
It's the
olds.
same 25 demented percent that thought George W. Bush was doing a great job at the end of his presidency.
Hello, you. I'm Sam Seder. Looking for smart progressive talk that is occasionally amusing? Well, subscribe to our YouTube feed. Subscribe to our podcast. Like us on Facebook. And just generally enjoy us.